Presenting today is a guest of ours, JD Trask, and he'll be covering how to manage your software bugs and still ship on time. JD is the CEO and co-founder of Raygun, a software intelligence platform. He has over 10 years experience managing and leading software teams and is currently helping over 40,000 developers manage and process over 1 billion software errors with Raygun. Customers include Slack and Virgin Holidays. Joining JD as a commentator is Jacek Materna, CTO of Assembla. We're a code and task management tool used by thousands of teams globally, and many of you probably on the call today are users of Assembla as well. Jacek has over 15 years of experience leading software and product teams in cybersecurity and SaaS. He's currently leading the Assembla team to drive our product roadmap, and customers include Altium and GLG. Again, I'll be assisting with questions throughout the webinar, and we'll set aside the last half hour for Q&A. And I do want to remind everyone that we will send an email with the recording to everyone that registered for today's webinar. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to JD.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Angela. Just checking, can you see the presentation, Angela? I'm going to assume that's a yes.
I'm sorry, I went on mute. Yes, okay. I apologize, I was on mute. Okay, go ahead.
Right. Cool. All right. So we've done the introductions, as mentioned. Yep, I'm John Daniel Trask, or JD, and I'm really pleased to be joined by Jacek here to throw in his comments on basically building really healthy, good software that delights customers. So what I wanted to do is cover off on a range of things. So how do we actually find and qualify software errors and performance issues? That's obviously the first part of any developer's job, is to figure, when it comes to putting the software in the customer's hands, is how do we measure that? Secondly, which KPIs do we actually want to use to benchmark that? In today's world, we tend to struggle with the fact that we have just boatloads of data, and actually getting a North Star that we're trying to track towards is really important. We want to talk about fostering a healthy company attitude towards software errors. By that, we need to acknowledge the fact that software errors are a fact of life, and not create a culture where people live in fear of breaking things, because that often can slow things down. And then lastly, how to maximize the resources and automate the error resolution process. So I'll be talking specifically about some processes that we use at Raygun in building our own services, as well as anything that I've heard out in the market that other companies are using, and look forward to hearing from Jacek on some of the things that Assembla are doing to ensure that they're delivering great software. So that's the high level of what I want to walk through today. So I wanted to start with, why did we decide to build Raygun? So Raygun by itself is a crash reporting and performance monitoring service. And by performance, we today are tracking real user timing. So what is the customer experience? And the best way to describe this is to tell you 3 stories. So we started out where we were building software development tools under a different brand called Mindscape. And we provided those tools online. People could download free trials and install them. And we had an object relational mapper, we had visual components, we had Visual Studio integrations. We had about 10 different products that we were selling on the market. And as a lot of people did back in the day, was we had a public forum, and people could post if they had issues or email us, and we would look into them and respond. And back in 2007, we were one of the first companies that was sort of doing daily, or as we call them, nightly builds of all of our products. So any one of our customers could download the latest build every single day if they wanted to. And this made for a really positive feedback cycle, where if a customer had an issue and they posted in our forum, they could tell us about it, and then we would typically be able to fix the issue, and the next nightly build they could download, and huzzah, they had a great experience and it was all fixed. And that worked really, really well for us as a business. It helped us grow really well in the early days. And this led us to the point where we reflected on how we were managing errors previously, and we'd always kind of wanted to build something a little bit more automated. And so we started out with the crash reporting piece that we called Raygun, and we began by instrumenting our Visual Studio integrations, because we knew that they were often the hardest issues for us to resolve for customers because of the complexity of Visual Studio. So we instrumented one of our products that had about 250,000 users of it, and we started aggregating this data that was coming in. And the most amazing thing that we first noticed was that out of all of the issues that occurred, only about 1 in every 100 users would ever actually tell us that they had a fault. And so you can imagine us as a software development team, me as the CEO, kind of going, holy cow, we forget the tip of the iceberg. We barely knew there was an iceberg even there for how little was actually being exposed to us. And so that really lit a light on the problem for us and sort of underscored the importance of having some sort of live error reporting capability. So that was the first part of the story. The next one was that back when I used to code, and now I don't write as much code as I used to, which is probably good for our software quality. I was making a change to our online store process just before the Christmas break. Now, I know here, I'm based in Seattle, but here in America, the Christmas holidays is not a particularly long period of time off, but in New Zealand and the Southern Hemisphere, that's our major holiday because it's the summertime. And so I was making a couple of quick tweaks to how our customers could buy our software and deployed it because we had Team City and Octopus Deploy, so we could make that really easy to get stuff out. And I went home and I was packing my bag and I was like looking at the information that Raygun was surfacing to me in these notifications. And I was like, oh my goodness, I've actually broken the ability for our customers to buy any products from us. And again, this was one of these moments where we were like, hey, if we aren't being told in a close to real-time fashion about new issues when we deploy, we could go weeks without making a sale thinking, oh, maybe it's just the holiday period or something like that. So learning from our own mistakes, that it's very easy to break things and have a material impact on the business, which is why it's important to be proactive about software issues. That was an important learning point for us. And lastly is that you don't want to necessarily be just getting this raw feed of data coming through. So you might, for example, think in terms of a logging system where you just append all of the errors or information that you care about. If you're not doing some sort of aggregation, that can very quickly become a real swamp of problems and you don't see the patterns. And so what we found, for example, in the Visual Studio extension case was that when we did an aggregation, which we ended up building into Raygun to automatically do, we found that 3 core bugs actually represented the bulk of all of the issues that our customers had. And of course, dealing with 3 root bugs is a lot easier than dealing with, say, 50,000 individual error reports. So that allowed us to very rapidly, within only a few days, improve the quality of that product by having that sort of grouping in there. So that are a couple of the reasons when we first started out with Raygun building it out. And so I wanted to sort of talk, going back a little bit further, before we started our business, I used to work as a software developer at a fast-growing New Zealand IT services company. And what I typically found was that there were 2 types of developers in the team. There were those that when they shipped things to production would largely be like, if I don't know that it's broken, then it's not broken. And then there was this other half of the developers that kind of took this mentality where they would do things like, hey, they would encourage the customer to tell them about problems. And then the next tier was to actually say, well, maybe I'll hook into the error event and send myself an email when an error occurs. And maybe I'll throw the stack trace in there. This was something that my business partner and I would frequently do. And this would lead to the third point, which was the problem with this model, which was that there would be so much noise that would flow through from bugs that weren't real bugs. Maybe they were JavaScript problems, maybe they were down to robots hitting the website, that you would actually slowly zone out. You'd firstly set up an inbox rule that would send all of your notifications off into a particular folder, and you'd check that for a few days, and then of course you'd sort of slowly stop checking it because you weren't seeing any big deal issues flowing through. And then lastly, at the time, performance wasn't wasn't considered a bug at all. It was just like, hey, we don't really have a way of measuring that. So we knew about exceptions. We didn't really know much about the performance the users were experiencing. This was, just to remind you, this was at the very early 2000s. But we thought we were being very proactive with these emails. So that was the old way. And so what we wanted to do was build out this model that actually worked as the new way. So I mentioned that idea of aggregation. So when we're getting this stream of errors, rather than sending it to an inbox, we wanted to send it to a web service so that we could perform the aggregations. And that grouping became really important to go from, say, dealing with 50,000 error notifications down to, say, 100, but with counts against them. Secondly is the ability to prioritize based on that. So you might look at the number of times the errors occurred. And then lastly, the real way to do this was to then start looking at the affected users as a way of prioritizing it. So rather than the raw count of errors, how many people were affected? Because one of the things that I feel as software developers we can lose sight of a little bit is why we build software in the first place. We build software for other people. Even if you're building automations that run on a back-end server that are just doing things with services, if you trace it far enough, we're always building software for people, and affected users is always the sort of the North Star metric. The plus side of sending things off to a web service meant that we didn't have to access servers for logs, and we could build integrations. And obviously we're here with our friends today at Assembla, where we can integrate with issue tracking software, and they can bring all of their tooling support around building out great workflows. So we're not trying to, say, convince product managers or project managers that they need to use a new service. The engineering team can pump that data into the tools that the rest of the company already use. We also consider performance an issue. So Google in particular have done a fantastic job at measuring the impact of performance. One of their metrics that they've discovered is that 40% of users will actually abandon a software website that takes longer than 3 seconds to load. Now, that's the sort of thing that as an engineer, we typically are building against localhost. We may be a little bit ignorant to how slow things might be going for users. And so, but if you're somebody like the CMO who's paying to try and acquire customers and they discover that the site is actually slow for a good number of users and you're losing them, it might as well be a software bug. You're alienating people. As another metric around that was based on research from Google, was 71% of users will stop using software after they've experienced a single error. So you combine the fact that you're losing people to poor performance and to software errors, it can stack up really quickly on the impact on customer growth, user satisfaction. So the overall goal of this entire system is we want customers to have a really great time. And before I keep barreling ahead, Jacek, do you have any feedback on some of the things you're doing at Assembla to improve the bug handling, the performance, things like that?
JD, from my perspective, I mean, you're kind of spot on with the performance as a key bug, and for customer experience. I mean, we track customer experience as an index in obviously some of the tools we use. So, given the fact that we're a web app, the performance for the page loads and the application loads are really key. And those are really top of mind. So, obviously we've got all the error tracking and all the automation that you mentioned, which we'll talk about more later in this presentation. But I think at the high level, you're absolutely right. It comes down to thinking about the fact that it's all about your users. And in this day and age, both mobile and web, the experience for a website or a mobile app is very much dictated by the customer's need to have it to be quick, responsive. So again, that response time is super critical to measure. So tools that can deliver, those kinds of insights are super key, and we use those. You guys use obviously your own. We use those as well to measure the fact that as we're building quality software, the experience for the customers are not degraded.
Yep. Yeah, and I think there's been some sort of real headline acts in that space, like you know, Google and Facebook and Amazon, where you know you don't go to Google and find that it's down or that it just you know failed to perform query 500 error. It's pretty rare you see that, and it's been that also associates a lot of trust with these brands, and you don't want to betray that user trust. So jumping ahead a little bit here, so we look at various forms of KPIs around how we track our software, and there's a blog post on this on the Raygun website. The most critical ones, however, are we want to track how many affected users of software bugs or poor performance that we've had. Usually we track that by deployment. We're shipping software fast enough because obviously we have continuous integration environment and we have automated deployments. We want to see how does the quality change between those different releases that we do. We also want to look at the unique bugs that have been introduced, so we can say how many new error groups were created by this new deployment. We also want to understand how many already resolved bugs were reactivated. So perhaps, and this is, again, this will get to the culture side, but especially with junior engineers, as people are upskilling, it's not super uncommon for somebody to fix a bug only to regress later on, especially if they're not writing unit tests for every bug that they fix where it could have been picked up in the build process. So we track that as well. And one of the last things that's really important about trying to ensure that we keep fixing up bugs and performance issues as we go is that we're trying to reduce technical debt. Technical debt certainly does mount up and it can lead to a lot of complexity. To use an example that we've had at Raygun, as we expanded into the United States, we needed to do a bunch of work around how we build our customers if they were in the United States. And so this led to a new layer in our billing system. Now I can assure you, I don't know about other developers, but I never liked working with code that billed people because it was the sort of thing where if it goes wrong, you can really, really, really piss off a customer. You don't want to inadvertently bill them 10 times as much or anything like that. Or if you underbill, it can seriously affect the business. So we sort of put in this new billing system alongside the existing customer thing. And of course, that just has a lot of complexity to it. There's all sorts of scenarios. So being able to measure, hey, this bug just occurred, it's affected this particular user, we can work with that user to fix things up, and we can get the engineering team resolving it quickly was really important in making that generally speaking, for most of our customers, a really seamless shift. So are there any KPIs that you would use, Jacek, at Assembla around tracking software success?
Yeah, no, it's very similar KPIs over here, the senior team. Coincidentally, we went through a billing migration ourselves in the last 12 months, and we kind of have a very similar story in the sense that we've upgraded our billing system to kind of an enterprise class system, and we went through multiple rounds of staging and kind of automation and validation, and all. At the end of the day, the tools that were tracking the activity, the crash logs, these nuanced edge cases were super critical in letting us kind of detect errors, in real time, so we could kind of have the conversations with customers, but also fix the issues if there were any, ahead of time, because in a lot of cases, the errors were occurring, but they weren't really impacting customer experience. Maybe it was something in the background, et cetera. So again, probably had a similar experience overall from that perspective. But yeah, I would say these are the key. I mean, for any software team, these are really, the key KPIs that I would say always come out across any team.
Yeah, and I kind of reflect a little bit on my conversations with friends of mine that are, either VPs of engineering, CTOs. KPIs for software teams is traditionally a really hard problem to solve because it might not be lines of code, it might not be commits, it might be, and so I think tying it as closely to customer satisfaction is about the clearest line for ensuring a quality delivery. It's very hard to quantify some of the things with software team throughput.
That's exactly right. I mean, at Assembla, one of the things we measure is exactly that, which is, after release, really awesome release where you get huge amounts of feedback from customers that are using it. They're sending, notifications or emails back to our product management saying, hey, I really love that feature. That trickles back down to the dev leads that were responsible for those, and that's ultimately like a lot of ways to measure success, end to end, which is, obviously there will be bugs in any piece of software, and there's tools you need to put in place to kind of triage those. That's kind of part of the modern enterprise. But I would agree that kind of measurement is in a lot of cases, we kind of look to our customers to kind of give us the feedback on, we really knocked it out of the park, et cetera.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So one of our key things, I touched on it earlier, is having a North Star metric. So the key one we track is the users affected by software bugs. I can say this as an engineer, but it can be very easy for a software developer to end up, and I was exactly like this, in a world where they've got their headphones on, they're pumping some good tunes, they're coding away, and their entire world at that point is kind of from the computer screen to the back of their head. Like that's it. So we really want to always be bringing the customer and the user back to be front of mind. And so reporting on that as the key metric is a big one for us. It's also much, much better than counting the total errors. There are so many contributing factors to an error count being high that could be irrelevant. A classic one we see is with JavaScript error reporting is that, say, within Chrome, extensions run within the JavaScript context of the page. So somebody has some crappy quality extension in their browser and it's blowing things up all over the show. You can't fix that, right? But it'll be one user that might be affected, and they might have generated 20,000 errors. So it's a little bit of a misdirection to just look at that count. So I mentioned in there, total error count still has some meaning, but it's not that much. And the example I've got here, and I'll actually jump to one in my browser here. This is just a quick demo. This is inside the Raygun app, looking at a website that doesn't have very much traffic. And you can see here we've done this aggregation, and we've got the last scene, the first scene, and the number of times it's occurred in the last 7 days. And you go 308, and how many users were impacted. Now, if we were not looking at the user count, we would absolutely prioritize this third bug higher than the second bug, even though the second bug has 5 times the number of affected users. So it's really important to keep those users in mind when you're doing that. And that allows us to more smartly allocate where our developer time goes. And so that's where integration with these issue trackers, for example, is super valuable, because project managers or someone can be sitting there looking to prioritize things. And it's an age-old problem with all people trying to manage projects that everything has a high urgency. Well, this is a great way of actually giving you a particular metric to grade that urgency. I'll just jump through here. Yep. So I also want to talk about the performance. So we also track the median application response time. And the reason we do that is because, firstly, averages are typically complete lies. The outliers totally skew an average time. Averages are a lot easier to compute because you can do a simple aggregation and say, well, this was the average time. But one outlier can skew it quite a lot. While a median is looking at what was the 50% mark? What are half my customers' experience in terms of load time or better? So it's a much better metric, a little bit harder to get. It's important we also keep the median application response time as front of mind as one of our KPIs, and they're one of the 4. So it gets your team to collaborate on making things faster. And the reason that it is becoming increasingly important is because poor application performance absolutely impacts your customer satisfaction and therefore your business in terms of how happy your customers are. In a lot of ways, you can consider the error management, the software development process, the performance as inputs into final outputs. So in output, you might be tracking an NPS score, for example. Now, the way a lot of people will think about improving NPS is maybe we're missing a feature, maybe the pricing's too high. I would put a pretty strong assertion out there that if you just made your application twice as fast and reduced your error count by 50%, that your NPS score would probably go up by 10 to 20% just off the back of that. How are you measuring the response time in Assembler, Jacek?
Yeah, no, it's good that you asked. You know, we have similar kind of things that we track from an experience point of view, and we've got, you know, customers, I'd say probably in 100 countries now, and one of the key things to look at is, you know, geographic latency. So that's one of those tricky ones where, you know, certain parts of the world may be getting very different performance by the fact that they have to get, you know, routed through the internet, so to speak. And so, you know, by having the ability to kind of isolate, like, listen, is it a new feature or is it on our end, or is it something that could be kind of the network path in between? Those are kind of measurements that are on top of this, like, you know, customer experience index, where, you know, the average may be very poor in a particular part of the world, but most of it is due to the fact that there's some kind of major routing outage, you know, with some undersea cables, and they're having to reroute it through different parts of the world. So again, just kind of tethering off your point there about the customer index. It's, you know, looking at geographies and making it a front and center KPI, which means that, hey, you know, as we add more code, let's make sure that our index is improving or at least staying the same, with the hopes of obviously continuously improving it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Totally agree with that. That's also one of the reasons why we're big fans of real user monitoring, not synthetic tests. Synthetic tests are useful for things like SLA checks and uptime tracking. But if you're not actually tracking your real users, often synthetic tests are running from, you know, a state-of-the-art data center over a high-quality fiber backend to another data center, and that can be a great experience. But if you're a person using a cell phone at an airport, you know, outside of your main areas, you're not necessarily understanding what your users are experiencing. So if people take away anything from today, it's going to be that I'm pretty obsessed with trying to make sure that the customer is happy. So we'll just jump along. The next one is looking at that P99 application response time. And so what we mean by this is, what is the experience that the slowest 1% of users are experiencing? So this again comes back to why things like the medians are important, is you actually want to get a full distribution of load time information. So what are the outliers? So I'll give you a quick example. I'll just jump back out of here. This is a screenshot from the Raygun Real User Monitoring product. I'm looking at a particular page here, and you can see here I've got the median response time is about 3.08 seconds. So that means 50% of our users are experiencing that. Now you can see here, however, that the average is quite a bit longer. And that's because that's just adding them all up and dividing them. So we at least know that 50% of our users or less are getting 3 seconds. But P90 in this case, we're breaking that out, and we can talk P90, P99. I'm not here to demo this till we're blue in the face, but the point here is that 10% of our users are actually experiencing, in this case, close to 9 seconds worth of load time. Now, you know, if 40% of users are going to abandon a site that takes longer than 3 seconds to load, what's 9 seconds doing? So we want to try and bring that down. This may always have a certain value to it, but we want to contract that distribution. And so on the slide here, I have a note. Let's aim for trying to make that, say, 5 seconds means slow, not 30 seconds. And people, I'll also comment, people are often blown away when they start using these sorts of tools for discovering actually how slow the software can be for a bad user experience. Similarly, on the crash reporting side, as a bit of a story, our smallest plan used to be 25,000 errors a month. You know, and we'd get large companies say, "There's no way we'd have that many errors. We don't believe it. You know, well, you know, we think we're going to be on that plan." And then they would put us in a trial and be like, "Oh, okay. Well, we're sending 25,000 errors every 2 hours." You know, it's one of those, if it's not measured, it's not managed situations. So it's always worth checking these things out. So I'll just jump to this one. This is the last KPI, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, resolve bugs versus new bugs. So again, not managing individual instances of crashes, but we want to understand how many new root cause bugs are occurring, and that's what the grouping is doing, versus how many things are we resolving. Are we resolving issues faster than they're occurring in our delivery pipeline, or are they mounting up? And if they're mounting up, then we are creating a time bomb, which is going to impact our customer satisfaction and users' experience. So that's our last one on there. So just summing up on this, it's important that if you can't measure these things, then it's really hard to manage them. And you don't want to be creating a process where measuring it is very, very difficult for you to do. You want to try and get something that's going to solve it. Now, obviously I'm biased towards our solution, but there are other solutions out there. The important thing is that you are measuring it. And then what gets measured gets done. So being able to actually get those metrics and having your maybe VP of engineering report against those KPIs, that is a guaranteed way to start seeing things improve, because they're going to start holding their team to account on those things. Cool. Anything to add at the moment, Jason?
No, that's exactly right. I mean, I think it comes down to you know, the measurement aspect. I think a lot of companies, I find that, you know, once they take the initiative to move to a platform that enables them to automatically discover these issues, you know, post deployment, and then kind of builds a culture and process around, you know, triaging the issues and kind of having the developers, you know, really key in on, you know, the customer experience as a result of those issues. I think what you find is, like I said, most people are just shocked initially by what they see. There's just so much going on in even the simplest of applications, and so even insights, you know, I've had conversations where even insights as simple as, you know, knowing that, you know, a particular continent performs differently than another one, just so radically different, you know, is hugely impactful, because it changes kind of some of your strategy around building out infrastructure, about, you know, how it relates to support cases that may be coming from different parts of the world. You know, just put some color on it. So I think it's super key just to get that data and the measurement, because you can't action against something you don't know.
Yeah, that geographic thing is interesting. I often make analogies back to, you know, the old bricks and mortar store, and it's like if your web application is your product, everywhere it's being loaded is like a different retail location, and you wouldn't run a retail chain where you only ever looked at the aggregate metrics for all of the stores. You wouldn't know which ones were performing and which ones weren't. You know, so in much the same way, you need to track where things are being used. Last point there is, with this stuff, we're trying to make it so that it's less work to improve the quality of your software. So things like, say, integrate it so that publish the bugs up into tools like Assembler, so that project managers, product managers can actually track that with the tools they're already familiar with, and speed up the turnaround time. If you are currently at a situation where you manage your bugs by occasionally customers sending you a Word document with a pasted 500 page inside it, you know, you'll be amazed at what these sorts of tools can do. So I'm just going to speed up a little bit here, because we're a little bit behind on time, and Angela will come on here and tell me off if I don't.
Yeah, we're doing good. Yeah.
Cool. So what we've been doing is we track Raygun with Raygun, which has been really interesting. And then we ended up where we create dashboards. And we create dashboards. I'm a big believer in information radiators. So putting these things up on screens around the office so that they are always front of mind with the team. I'll show you a very quick example here. This is a dashboard that we'll throw up where you can see recent crashes, how many users are having a crash-free experience, what is the current error groups. This also includes usage data. This is a demo, by the way, hence the best dashboard ever named. What's our error rates looking like? All that sort of stuff. And these can be customized and created by any of the members of the team that want to, but then we do have them up visible to others to keep it front of mind. So software errors, and keep in mind, when I talk about errors, I include shoddy performance as an error. Shouldn't be an afterthought. So we want to put in a better workflow to put these in place. We want a way that's going to be collaborative with everybody, and we want to make code quality a priority to ensure that our customers are happy. We want to help play into our rapid delivery process. I know even big, slow, lethargic businesses, when I talk with them, everybody's trying to deliver software faster. There's a great quote from a friend of mine, which is, it's not the big that eat the small, it's the fast that eat the slow. And that's so true in software. If you can iterate and deliver better quality software faster, you'll do really well. It's also important with this that you're helping your team save face. And we're trying to ensure that our team is accepting of the fact that software faults will be shipped by mistake, but how do we make that sort of a known norm, and how do we fix it quickly? So some of the tips we have for a healthy attitude towards software errors is building a process so you can quickly iterate and resolve bugs. We've kind of done that part to death. We want to make sure that when your development team are in your code base, that they're going to see some code and be like, that doesn't look quite right. They're going to get used to the fact that they've been fixing these bugs. And I'm generally a proponent of the idea that you shouldn't have a team of people who are only there to fix bugs. I'm a believer that you want to assign back to whoever created the issue. And the reason for that is, if you do that, I find it's a really good way of creating a personal feedback loop for improving software quality on the individual basis. People, I've talked with people who have had large QA teams, for example, and they kind of, I'm not saying this of all people, but they kind of develop this attitude of like, I coded something up and I threw it over the wall and I'll just wait for them to tell me if something's wrong, and maybe they miss it and it goes out to production. I'd prefer we ship faster and then it goes back to that person. And then if they're complaining about how much work they're having to do fixing bugs, well, there's a way to improve that, and that's to just go a bit slower and create better quality software to begin with. Anyway, any points to some of that, Jason?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the key is the healthy attitude. I mean, it's basically, your biggest sensors are your developers, and I mean, empowering them with culture that, it's errors will pop up, issues will pop up, gives them the tools to fix them as soon as possible, ensures quality's high, happy days.
Yep, absolutely. Software bugs are a lot like health issues, right? You don't get angry at a person for coming down with a cold. They just happen, and we want to get people back in tip-top shape quickly. One of the things we try to encourage at Raygun is taking an investigative approach to errors and performance issues. So, for example, let's take a null reference exception. You see that, and it could be just really easy to slap in some code that says, and if it's null, then return false, that sort of thing. I talk a little bit internally about always pulling on the thread. Let's trace this up. How did this variable come through as null? Maybe there's a bigger issue here, just waiting to be found. So that's important. And then obviously these tools can actually make the process of improving software quality more enjoyable, less having to dig around in the mud and trying to figure out what's going on with log files and whatnot. So we want to try and ultimately automate the error resolution process. So automation, generally helps us improve throughput. We often make fixing errors take priority over releasing features. So this can be a little frustrating at times, where somebody might have something they're working on and then, hey, these issues have come up that you were related to, we need you to fix them. But at the end of the day, old features working is better than shipping new features that are now mixed in with things that don't work. And so recognizing customers would rather have a great experience with slightly less features than lots of features that don't work. So yeah, pairing them up into your workflow. So obviously, because we've presented this webinar together, I talk a lot about the assembler integration, but we also integrate with things like your chat tools like Slack, and with your source control tools as well. All those sorts of things we integrate with. So as an example, here's a workflow that we would have. So an error gets reported in, the developer can then go and view the information about the error. They can triage that error into a third-party system. Somebody can then work to assign that to the particular engineer that they want to have work on it, then go and deploy that fix once the engineer's made it, and then through Raygun they can also then see that they've resolved an issue with a particular deployment. And so this whole process can occur very, very quickly due to all of the automation that's in place. So to this point, I often talk about this internally. Where do we see the market going? Why are tools like this becoming commonplace? I think the development of continuous integration, build servers, things like that, and automated deployments, we use Octopus Deploy for our deployment infrastructure, they really showed people how to make the delivery process streamlined, automated, less risky, reducing deployment issues, and that's been wonderful. That's been a huge improvement for our industry. But what we are missing right now is it's not a closed loop yet. You can get things into production, but we don't have the piece that's feeding it back to the team now that something's in production about what's actually happening to create a fully iterative loop. We like to talk about iterating, but without the feedback part, we're making up things as we go. At best, we're having a guess at things. And so we see that this sort of space really helps create a tighter iteration loop. So reporting back on what's shipped. So, Facebook is famous for the run fast and break things mentality. We have a slight adjustment to that, which is run fast and break things, but fix them fast, or as sometimes they fix them even faster than you broke them. Because you've got to iterate towards a positive outcome. Anything to add with this, Jacek?
No, it's great. I like the quotes here from Facebook. I think that's kind of probably a dated quote, I would say, in their books, but it's exactly right. I mean, I still think there is a huge gap between the post-deploy universe and kind of bringing it back to the team. I mean, we all talk about, notionally what happened and how it could happen, but at the end of the day, it's still not as smooth as the kind of pre-deployment phase. And so being able to leverage a tool and APIs and all that kind of stuff that lets you, for example, close that feedback loop. So, whatever's happening in production, whether you're sending it to Slack or you're opening tickets based on different business rules and conditions, you're basically telling the story owner that may have deployed a particular feature across, let's say, 10% of the customer base, 10 minutes is what's happening in the wild. What's happening in this part of the world, that part of the world. So then, we don't have to, quote unquote, manually go back and do some kind of assessment. So I think that feedback loop, big opportunity, absolutely. And there are tools like your tool, Raygun and others, in concert with some great other automation kind of platforms, I think create the ability to put together some really simple but also powerful closed feedback loops. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Speaking of Facebook briefly, I thought it was telling when the social media movie came out that they actually talk about the impact of software problems. There's one scene where the young Zuckerberg is kind of losing his cool because he says they've gone down and this is going to create a negative feedback loop of a bad experience. So they won't invite their friends, they're not going to engage, and then it's all downhill. And he has this big rant about we don't go down, and that's the thing. Software, the expectations on software companies are only going up, and there's no room if you want to be a winner to let all of this stuff slip. So I always say, what do we want? we all want better software. Ideally, we would have had it back in the DOS days. You know, our industry has taken its sweet time. But today is the best time for you to go and actually start looking at how can we improve this stuff. It takes a little bit of effort to get up and running, not very much. Again, biased, but with our platform, I'd say it'd probably take you, maybe 30 minutes to get something integrated to start, and maybe half a day if you were doing the full integrations with different providers like Assembler and Slack and things like that. So don't sort of ignore that sort of thing. So in conclusion, we need to be clear that software development teams are not just an expensive part of any, of a software company, and they're actually strategic in building competitor-beating businesses. The products and software that we're building are what our customers are engaging with, and so there is a huge investment going on these days in trying to help these software teams be more competitive and more productive. They do cost, as software engineers, we cost a lot of money, and so we need to try and get the most out of that team that we possibly can. And so this sort of full feedback loop is one way of doing that. I think we might be at the Q&A part. Whew, only 17 minutes over.
No, that was great. All good stuff. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and open it up for Q&A. We have some in the queue, so we'll go ahead and start going through those. First question. How does Raygun typically set up and integrated into, how does Raygun typically set up and integrated into a software stack, and are there limitations around different deployment models?
Yeah, so one of the things that we did in building it out, and again, this was part of our driver at starting out, was that some of these tools sort of were out there, is we're a full stack provider. So we don't think that you want your data in silos. That's the same reason that we bring crash reporting and RUM together. So we support about 25 different languages and platforms. So you can support mobile applications, back-end software, web, front end, all of that stuff in there. The way that we integrate today is using an SDK. And so you can integrate into your code and usually just deploy it out through your existing deployment process. You don't need agents on boxes. You don't need anything weird on the cell phones, things like that. So that's the approach there. Specific to any particular issues for various platforms, we've put a lot of work into trying to solve specific challenges of certain languages. So for example, I'll pick on PHP. PHP doesn't have a built-in nice threading model unless you've actually custom compiled in pthreads. And so we built a bulk upload process, because if we were forking off curl to send data off to ourselves and you had a lot of errors, then you'd actually run into stability issues. So we look at each platform uniquely, but we do build a sort of a standardized SDK as well for all of those different platforms that you may want to support. And then you can see all of the data from all of those in the Raygun system, and then you can build dashboards that can aggregate or deaggregate the data in there. Does that sort of answer the question? I know they can't answer directly back, but I hope it does.
No, I think that was great, JD. Let's move on to the next one. Are there ever issues with false positive or inconsistent results? It's a great question.
Yeah, so I'll go with the first go at this, but I'd also be interested to hear Jason's comments. We certainly, we've worked with customers around false positives. The example, sometimes they're false positives, sometimes they're just outside the sphere of what you can do. So I cited an example in there of somebody that runs a dodgy Chrome extension. At the same time, we also have customers where bots try and scrape their systems and perform badly, and sometimes that can be hard to detect. So one of the, incidentally, when we first launched Raygun, one of the major selling points was that when we do an aggregation, so when we build to the root cause of the issue, we provide the option to permanently ignore that bug. So what people can do is they'll usually put us in be gobsmacked at the volume, notice that there might be a couple of false positives in there, flag them as being permanently ignored because they can't fix them or it's just trash anyway, to try and get down to improve that signal to noise ratio. There is also challenges around doing the identity of errors. Cross browsers is a good example. We've had to put in monumental effort to try and make sure that an error that occurs, say, in Chrome is aggregated with the same error that came from, say, Edge, even if they have different messages, different number of stack trace lines, all of that stuff. That can be a problem. So we built in capabilities to do things where you can merge groups together. There's a lot of that sort of tooling that was required that, when we very first built the product, we did think about identity, but it was one of those things where it's become a mounting issue where we're investing a lot of time and resource into trying to make that better for customers. Jacek, anything with false positives at your end?
Yeah, I think, you summarized it pretty well. I think the thing that pops into my mind is around kind of the complex cases where, we've had these issues multiple times. Any company would experience these where, you're getting error reports from just different customers across different, potentially different flows, and at some level they don't seem related, right? They're hitting, different servers, different kind of points across the network, and so it's easy for the development team to kind of say, hey, it's probably, it's something on the user side, et cetera. So the issue there is that, what you want to do is you want to use the tools that you have, like a Raygun, et cetera, to basically allow you to say, listen, we've got a huge system, but we're seeing, hotspots in these areas. And this lets you, create a better story for the developer, if it's, say, coming in from support, or maybe it's coming in directly from the automated system. But you're able to say, listen, we're getting these hotspots in these zones. It's kind of inconsistent. There's no single source of issue, but maybe this is some kind of complex race condition, right? It could be something that's just very difficult to track down with like a stack trace or kind of a log trace. So I find it very valuable that these tools are able to kind of sift through a lot of noise and kind of take three independent things and kind of allow you to really say, listen, there may not be totally related, but when you look at them in a certain way, it gives the developers that kind of aha moment that says, oh, you know what, this is probably what's happening, and then boom, they're able to kind of fast forward a lot of what it traditionally would be, this kind of, let's put it into the staging environment, let's try to reproduce the exact scenario, which usually never works because you can never reproduce it in staging anyway. So, using it as kind of a treasure map tool, in a lot of ways, we use it that way, and it's been very effective for us. It's kind of pinning down some of those really hard to isolate issues. So that's what comes to mind with the inconsistency. It's kind of this that topic at first hand. Yeah.
Yeah. While you were sharing that, I've loaded up a quick example here, which is some of the things we've done to try and solve this even for ourselves. So this is looking into a particular error group inside of Raygun, and on the side we get the aggregate stuff. And so we have customers who find things like, hey, when we looked at it, it turned out that it was only, say, Edge that had this problem. So the developer will know that they need to test it in Edge. Then we overlay it with the RUM data, so we can actually give the user session exactly what they were using for this particular crash, overlaid with the performance data, and see that they went from this page to this page. In this case, this user's doing a refresh constantly. And then lastly, you can actually go right down to the breadcrumbs, which would include the clicks, AJAX calls, because you're absolutely right. The amount of time you can spend trying to figure out what the heck, how to reproduce an error, is a big one. And I was in a conversation this morning, and we let you attach custom data to error reports as they occur. We actually had a customer who said, hey, we might actually load in our React app the state from Redux in there, because that way we could actually load that state in on a local machine and see what was going on and debug into it. And I thought that was a really clever idea, because you're right, you don't want it to feel too much like a treasure map. You want to make it a little bit easier.
That's it, exactly. And even a recent example around this was, you know, kind of going tangential to the original question, but it's kind of noteworthy that, you know, we have a pretty sophisticated security bounding program in place. We're a partnership with HackerOne, and you know, we recently had quite a pretty good month last month where we had quite a number of penetration testers, you know, audit our system for different vulnerabilities, et cetera, and we actually ended up using, you know, the tools that we're talking about today to really deliver extremely quick triage and resolution times, which is one of the key performance indicators that lets you, you know, say that you're on top of security issues. So like I said, there's kind of multiple uses for the data. You know, it's not just obviously, you know, it's customer-facing side, but as a tangent to that, you know, the underlying tools that allow you to kind of correlate this data, we used it like quite effectively, like I said, to say like, well, listen, this particular hacker actually did all of these steps. Here's his entire story in tool, and that lets the developer really hone in on the code that was needing to be fixed extremely quickly. So we were very responsive. So again, I just thought I'd mention that because it's just kind of another use case for this kind of tool.
Absolutely.
Great. We have one more question that I'd like to just quickly answer for Brian, and then we'll end it with this question. So from Brian, we currently have very little in regards to an error tracking system and typically prioritize based off of the loudest customer principle. Even with the data from Raygun, how do you go about balancing most frequent errors from the ones that are more frequently reported or the heard customer issue, for example?
Yeah, so that is a big one. You know, at the end of the day, we do get some folks that can get rather vocal. One of the things I actually, you know, as CEO, I love hearing from our customers. You know, we have a link right in the sidebar to send messages to our team because we want, the more we can engage with them, the better. You would have picked up in here, you know, I love people using our software. Funnily enough, what my biggest frustration is not so much the loud customers, it's the ones that you never hear of. And they're the ones that you might churn or lose without ever knowing that they were having a bad experience. And so I look at it the other way, as oftentimes the loud, sometimes, I don't know about you guys, but sometimes the loudest users, most of the time, are actually the smallest of our customers. The big ones where we care immensely about them, from a business standpoint, we worry all the time if we're not engaging with them. So if somebody is noisy, that's not to say we dismiss it just because they're a small customer. We'll go in and look at it. We've been fortunate that a lot of the time our ability to deliver a fix has been fast enough that regardless of the size of customer, we want to fix things. We're also aware that if we go in and we look at the bug again to say, hey, if it's just this one customer that's got this issue, so when we had the affected user count, that's a bit of a warning sign to us in general, like, hey, this is going to be something a bit odd about how they're using the software. And that may mean that it's not actually a technical fix. So I use the example of Chrome extensions and things like that, where we might actually be able to take that away from being an engineering problem and actually liaise with that customer from our account management team to resolve the issue and find out what's going on that way. So like I say, I'd be more worried about the customers that aren't talking to you for what's going on, and that basically underscores the value of automatically collecting this information. I don't know if that's a particularly good answer, but yeah, Jacek, do you have 2 cents on how you do that?
Yeah, I think you know, I'll start on to continue your thread on the silent customer before I get into the loud ones. I think, you know, that's absolutely right. I mean, the customers you don't hear about, the ones that may contract, they churn, et cetera, you know, from a business perspective, you know, those that are in the business of delivering software to customers, you know, being able to correlate the information of their experience to be able to predict, you know, listen, these customers or this maybe category of customers having a bad experience with a particular feature, being able to collect that as quickly as possible, aggregate it so that, you know, you can bubble it up to the business decision makers. I think, just this kind of tool is an enabler for that. So
Yep.
even simple models that let you say, listen, the experience for customers is low in these areas. This could be indicators of why certain business conditions are occurring. So I think, like I said, we use that, some of our tools to build some of those models, always looking to build more sophisticated ones. But again, I agree. I think the silent ones are key. It's hard to really know what they're doing without a tool like this. But I think to address the point of the loud customers, I think that's a tricky answer. I would say, when you look at customers, typically they are engaging you because they're having a experience issue. And I think the companies with the really successful customer success teams that are able to, pull up their data, look at what their issues are, and guide them through, maybe the resolution is far away, but able to kind of handhold them through the process. I believe in kind of transparency in the sense that, listen, we've got your issue. Here's what it's looking at. We're looking at maybe some kind of network issue between you and our servers. We're going to look at it with you together, keeping them kind of in the queue and holding them through the process tends to typically, in my opinion, de-escalate a really hot customer into a medium one. But if you aren't able to get the hot customers to back off, that's where a robust, I would say, level 1 to level 3 kind of process comes in, where, if a hot customer is backed by certain SLAs, because maybe they're doing premium support or whatnot, then it comes down to your team organization, right? Then that's the tools that allow you to get data from one tool to the other tool to the other tool extremely quickly. So by the time you wake somebody up, they pull up their Mac and they load everything up, and all the context is there and they're ready to go. So I think, again, moving the data between systems, super key. But it comes down to process at that point, I would think. I don't know if there's a magic silver bullet for particularly prioritizing the loud customers. I think it comes down to process and just your view of your customer and their teams.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's also, you hit on another point there as well, which is, are they loud, or are they, might not be an or, it could be an and, or are they angry? Because some people are loud just because they're super passionate about your product, right? And so they're the ones that, they're probably going to be reasonably accepting if there's a little bit of time frame on it. They're just huge fans. If it's a really angry customer, my usual advice to our team is, one, try really hard not to get angry back, because it can inflame things. Try to I would say hug them back to being a happy customer, and that usually means what may almost feel like over communicating on the resolution. They need to feel like they've got a good handle on what's going on, and they might be genuinely angry because it might not just be that the software let them down, but now they've been let down in the eyes of their peers, their boss, whatever, and having some empathy around that, it is important. And that's where, as long as you've got the communication lines open and you're keeping them in the loop, they're usually pretty happy. And the reason that they're pretty happy with that is because so many companies out there completely screw this part up. They seem like a faceless corporate, and so when you actually engage, people can very quickly go from being very unhappy to quite delighted. I mean, that's what we used to get with our nightly builds. Hey, I reported a bug. I'm pretty steamed it didn't support this thing, and then the next day, we'd come back and be like, cool, that's fixed. Download the new version, and you would turn this at-risk customer into just this huge fan.
That's some great advice. Okay, well, this a little bit over the hour, so this has been really, really great. JD, thank you so much for your time today, joining us from Seattle, and as well, Jacek, thank you joining us from Krakow. It was a great, informative webinar. I think everybody on today got a lot out of it, and for those that weren't able to attend, we're going to send out the recording to everybody that registered, so they'll be able to watch the recording, and we might have some follow-up questions, so we'll keep the conversation going post-webinar. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Again, thank you, JD and Jasik, and we'll be in touch soon.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.